The following episode contains sensitive topic information that may not be appropriate for young listeners, as well as religious or other views that may not reflect those of the Sirens team.
Hello out there, everyone. Welcome to Sirens of the Supernatural. We're bringing you another episode of our September Spooktacular tonight. And we hope you're enjoying all these special guests and their many talents and knowledge. And we're just learning a lot from them and having a lot of fun doing it. So something fun for September. Ryan, Lindsay, how y'all doing?
Doing great. How are you?
Doing great.
Yeah, doing good. Having a good week.
Yeah.
Everything going smoothly.
Oh, yeah. Excited about, our favorite season's coming right around the corner.
Halloween.
We've been getting a lot of guests, getting a lot of traction. Thanks for all the followers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is going to be another really awesome episode. So I'm looking forward to this also.
Yes, I'm really excited. I can hardly wait. Before we introduce our special guests, I just want to give a shout out to their podcast. It's the Eerie Travels podcast, and we'll be letting them tell us more about that. So we always love having fellow podcasters on the show. And but they also, between them, they've written books. They've done a lot of different things. So as we bring them in, I'm going to give you a little bit of info out there, listeners, just a little bit of background info, and then we'll have some questions for them and find out more about them. So first, Mark Muncy. Linz, if you want to bring Mark in. He is a best-selling author along with co-author Carrie Schultz. Books include Eerie, Florida, Freaky Florida, Creepy Florida, as well as the Eerie Appalachia book series from History Press. And that's got me really intrigued. So we're going to ask you about that. Hello, Mark. Thank you for joining.
Hi, gang. Available in fine bookstores and Cracker Barrels everywhere. So.
Yes, we're all about promoting.
Yeah.
So that is great. And thank you for joining us.
Oh,
and
my pleasure.
We're going to bring your partner in crime, maybe. I don't know. Erika Lance. Hi, Erika.
Hi. I could have warned you he was going to hold up one of his books. Bring up his books. That's all we're going to hear about for hours. And see, I'm just.
Hey, we're all about cheap plugs. If you guys want to advertise anything, that's great.
We're all about that.
We're all together. We all have similar interests. We all have commonalities. So. Yeah, we're all about having fun. As you can see, we're kind of laid back. This ain't CNN or, anything like that. That's one of the things people like about the broadcast. So, yeah, we're excited to have you guys and, no stress. You're family here, so we're all good.
Your family. And I wanted to tell our listeners a little bit about Erika. She is also an author, and she writes horror, suspense, sci-fi, and some fantasy. Her books include No Place for Happiness and Illusions of Happiness. Do you have one of your books to hold up, Erika?
I don't have one of my books to hold up.
They're packed in my car for Dragon Con.
They are. They're packed in my car for Dragon Con.
Gotcha.
But, no, you can get my books anywhere. They don't have happy endings, so that is my warning with any of the stories behind. If you need it to be wrapped up in a neat little bow, do not read my stuff. It does not count for anybody. So
interesting.
That's cool because everybody knows there's a happy ending. You're like, I know what's going to happen. It never ends on a sour note. So there's always that plot twist. So that's good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, it's different. It's different.
And me and Mark actually have our first book in the Eerie Travels series. The Dark Side of the Smoky Mountains is up for pre-order, where it's a travel guide to the spooky side. So we take you on a little journey all around the dark side of the Smoky Mountains and all the scary, creepy places, including all the neat places to eat and places to stay where you may or may not actually get any sleep because of what else is staying there with you. So
oh, that's great.
That's
a must. Yeah, that's a must have.
That is so fun.
That sounds like a lot of travel and research and fun and
we've been working on that one for about 1.5 years now. So
Okay. Wow. Okay, and so together you guys host the Eerie Travels podcast, and I saw that you discussed the weird, the unusual, all things eerie, monsters, dark history, legends, ghosts, and more. And you mentioned Dragon Con. I want to throw this out there. So Mark and Erika will be speakers for multiple panels at Dragon Con, and that's coming up in Atlanta the weekend after we record this episode. So while we're recording tonight, they're getting excited about leaving tomorrow morning to go to Dragon Con. Tell us a little bit about Dragon Con, because I don't know that I've heard of that one.
So Dragon Con, I'll start. Dragon Con started originally as a sort of a nerd gathering. It was a pretty small nerd gathering before it was cool. And me and Mark have been nerds since before it was cool to be nerds. We were the nerds that got shoved into lockers in high school, like those nerds. Like, yeah. I call them the OG nerds. So, but Dragon Con is in Atlanta. It's in downtown Atlanta. There's, I think, 5 or 6 different host hotels, including like the Amerismart, which is a huge 5 or 6 level convention center that hosts literally just their vendors. So somewhere in the neighborhood of 100,000 people descend for this weekend. And it is just back-to-back fan panels and all sorts. You get to meet celebrities and things like that. So me and Mark are going on, I think it's our 4th year of being asked to talk and do panels. And we're very fortunate. We get to do a live Eerie Travels panel for Dragon Con. So we're excited about that. So yeah.
Nice.
And
so cool.
It's really great because it's like the big cons, like MegaCon and San Diego and New York Comic Con and all that. This is on that level, but because it's split up amongst the 5 hotels, they literally take over all of downtown Atlanta. They have a big parade that goes through with all the cosplayers and everything. That's a huge thing every year. But because it gets that small con feel in the panel rooms, because there's literally 20 different panels going on in the 5 different hotels at every given moment. So you're with your tribe. Like there'll be a panel on the most obscure science fiction show that you've ever heard of, right next to a panel on the 7th anniversary of Creature from the Black Lagoon, right next to a panel on how to date a cosplayer. And it's funny. So you're with your tribe, you're with your own good people, but and like big names from writers and celebrities in every field. And they have a paranormal tract, which it's called the X tract. And that's one of the ones we're on. And then we're also in the alternative history and fantasy and some other stuff. So, and I'm in the horror track. I think Erika's in that with me.
I'm the horror track, and I'm doing a ridiculous amount of panels on fairies this time. I don't know how that happened exactly, but I'm excited about it.
Yeah.
So fun.
Lindsay and my other daughter got me turned on to A Court of Thorns and Roses. That series.
Actar.
Yes. And wow.
Yeah.
Our live panel is going to be obscure Appalachian holler cryptids.
Yes.
So, that's what our special show is going to be. That's one of our newfound pride and joy, at least mine. I know Erika just enjoys the ride on that. But when I was doing Eerie Appalachia, it was during 2020 and the world was on lockdown, and we were doing the Appalachian Trail. So we got to talk to all these little families, these little these families in their hollers. They thought it was the end of the world. And so they wanted their stories to live on. So they were telling me these legends of their legendary beasts that lived in the mountains behind them that had only been shared in their family for generations. So it was very cool to be able to talk and share those. And that's part of what we're going to be talking about. So.
Yeah.
Nice.
So fun.
Are these panels recorded? Do y'all record the panels?
Well, so we have a little situation. We have a follower of our podcast by the name of X, and he somehow, anytime he mentions something he heard at one of our panels, none of our technology works. And that sounds silly, but sometimes, yes, we can record them. I'm going to say yes. And then other times, not quite sure what he does exactly, but it doesn't get recorded. So I heard from someone else told me that if you search videos on Dragon Con, one comes up from Tampa Jay and Chris, who are friends of our podcast. We know them really well. And they recorded some of theirs is the only recording that survived of our last panel. And it's in their video that is, I guess, one of the top videos about Dragon Con. So I'm like, look, you can see part of us from there.
Okay. Well, that's really interesting. And how many days does this last? Like 2 or 3 days?
No, it's 6.
This
6
one's huge.
days?
Yeah, this one goes from Thursday till Labor Day. So
yeah, it actually already started kind of today. There's a little bit of stuff today. We don't arrive till tomorrow, and then we're there till Sunday, but it still goes for Monday and I think a little bit of Tuesday. I think
Tuesday morning actually has some events. Yeah.
Wow.
Crazy.
We might have to
The
look
major
into
show is Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but this one
Right.
extends. Yeah.
It is. I will just tell you, if you're going to go, one, you have to prepare for a million humans. There are so many people, like in cosplayers, it's amazing. But if you don't do well in crowds, everything is a crowd through this entire event. And then there is a lot of walking, because there is walking between the hotels to go see the different places, things, and people. And like I said, the vendor hall by itself, if you imagine 5 convention stories, like entire convention halls, but 5 stories of them.
Yeah.
And so it takes probably, 6 hours to get through just the vendor halls.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the celebrity room is just swamped nonstop the whole time you're there. So
I'm sure.
And that's crazy. And I know I'd met you guys before previously at like the Smoky Mountain Terror, and I'd been other places, out from here. Because generally speaking, around here, we started this, we like actually what y'all are doing as far as finding out the old wives' tales, the stories from people here in this, in the areas, the mountains, the stories that don't get told. That's kind of our similar interest, right? And, and then when the Smoky Mountain Terror come up, I was like, hey, I'm going to go check this out. And it blew my mind that the amount of people here locally that's still interested in the amount of people, that show up at the vendors, that write the books that, and it surprised me that they're all local. They're not like from far off just coming in for these things.
Smoky Mountain Terror, I got my Twilight picture.
Oh.
And it's amazing.
With all the vampires.
And it blows my mind. And, and like I said, we're excited to have you guys on here because, this is basically what we love. This is what we enjoy. This is our passion, and we're excited to have like-minded people here, and you guys, and you mentioned like Dragon Con and stuff like that. I know, Mark, you are a big fan of like Dungeons and Dragons and you have like a collection.
Yep.
So does that have anything to do with kind of you being involved in these type of things?
I guess it was kind of how it went into when I started, like I said, as a nerd in the 70s and 80s growing up, and we had the few cons, but they were not nearly what they are today. But that's where you found your friends and you could meet, and you could walk right up and talk to Harlan Ellison and just hang out with him for like hours. And he would just talk to you. And cause you were, nerdy kid who wrote books and he was happy with that. But they've grown so much now, but that was when I first started. I started as a haunted house proprietor. I wanted to, I made my own haunted house in Florida, and I'd grown up in the Appalachians up in West Virginia, Kentucky and stuff. But I decided I wanted to base our haunted house on local lore and legends. So I decided, well, I couldn't do it on my mountain lore. So I had to start studying the Florida lore and legends. And so I found out there was so much of that. And then when the cons started getting big, I wanted to take my kids to the cons, but I couldn't afford to. But if we did our haunted house and said, hey, we'll bring monsters and stuff to scare your guests at your Comic-Con, the Comic-Con would let us come in. And that's how I got in to all these cons.
That's
we'd advertise our haunted house. we'd have them come over to our haunted house, as buses and stuff. But it was a lot of fun. But then it was this cross-pollination. And then as the haunted house ended and I started actually writing full time again, that was when it was like, okay, I see there's an audience for paranormal and horror at Comic Cons, because everybody's walking down to Comic Con, they see Iron Man, Spider-Man, Thor, a million copies of these guys. And then suddenly, oh, hey, there's a guy with a spooky book. I like that too. And we stood out. And so that's what started it all. So and now there's these horror cons like Smoky Mountain Terror. They're even doing Smoky Mountain Terror Cryptids, which we're going to be at in September.
Yes, that sounds.
We're excited for that one. But we started realizing the horror cons were a new thing, and I'm like, well, we do fit in here as well. And again, they're like, oh, there's Chucky, there's Leatherface, there's Jason, there's this. Oh, wait, this guy's got Mothman, and this guy's got Bigfoot. Oh, that's different. And so we stand out there too. Yeah. So it works out a little bit both ways for us.
Well, how long were you in Florida, Mark?
30 plus years before I escaped over the wall back in Appalachia. So
yes. Now Ryan and I grew up in southwestern Virginia. Kind of, it's in that corner that's closer to like West Virginia, Kentucky. Not in West Virginia and Kentucky, but very close. And so, yeah, all of those old stories back in the hollers, family tales. Yeah, we know exactly. That's kind of why we got started. Our great grandmother was like a great storyteller, and she used to love to scare us kids to death to make us be quiet and good. So,
I grew up in right at the Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky corner there near Ashland area. I grew up in a town called Louisa. Okay. But my dad was a Greyhound bus vice president, so we got moved around almost as much as a military kid. So we lived everywhere from North Ohio, Dearborn, Michigan, all the way down to St. Petersburg, Florida, where we wound up at the end. So
okay. Now, Erika, have you always been in North Carolina?
No, I grew up in Hollywood, California.
What?
Wow. So I come at this from a different angle. So I did the nerd stuff. Like I played the early Dungeons and Dragons. So I had that whole nerd street cred. But I actually came at this more from a true crime and a horror aspect like that. And I actually met Mark. Ironically, me and Mark have been in the same circles, and I'm not even joking about this, for like 30 years. We've known the same people. Somehow we never met, but we'll be talking, and I'll say a name, and he's like, "Oh yeah, blah blah blah." And vice versa, he'll say a name, and I'm like, "You know, blah." And so somehow the universe did not want us to meet, which was probably a good thing now that we have. So, but I ended up running into him at a horror con in Florida, and we became friends. And then I was like, with his storytelling, I was like, you should do a podcast. That same thing came out of my mouth for the last like 4 years. And finally I was like, okay, what is the problem? Why can't I get you to do a podcast? And it came down to apparently he needed my plucky comic relief and me asking all the questions the listeners have. So, he sort of pulled me into the paranormal world. But my whole thing was like, I grew up when the Night Stalker was killing people in California. He killed somebody down the block from my house. It was terrifying. Yeah, a lot of that, Hillside Strangler, all of those, delightful humans. So that's my... I know the true crime stuff. I can talk about true crime all the time. But then me and Mark started Eerie Travels about 1.5 years ago, and it's been amazing. And we get to now. I've learned so many places that I refuse to go into. So there's that.
Well, that answers the question I was going to ask about how you all got started, because I think I saw you guys started your podcast in January of 23.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It was. I'd been a guest on over, I think it was close to 1,000 podcasts, and as a guest, and so that's everybody kept telling me, "Why don't you do your own? Why don't you do your own?" And I just kept saying, somebody's got to pay me, or something, because I can talk, but I'm telling the same stories 1,000 times over. That's fine, but coming up with new stuff every week, that's going to be tricky.
Yeah.
But that was when Erika's like, well, I'll be your sounding board, so you're not just talking and droning for an hour. And I'm like, okay, then I'm good. So.
Now, and it requires that you do a lot of traveling, right? And not just like to cons and things, but you travel to locations that you research. And how does that work? You just kind of pick a location because you've heard a story or someone's told you about it, and then you're like, let's go and share this with our listeners.
Well, I refuse to write about any place you couldn't actually go to. I worked on, when I was a kid, I worked with the late, great Charlie Carlson on a book called Weird Florida, which is probably one of those, you still see it for sale in bookstores everywhere. And he put in a lot of places that were just cool places he had heard stories about and stuff like that. And then when I got older and I was trying to update it with him, he was a little too sick. He died a short time later, and he was like, go ahead. And that's when became our book, Eerie, Florida. I wanted to make sure it was only place, because so many of the places he put in that book were closed to the public or bulldozed or no longer around. Yeah. And some of them, admittedly, he invented. So I wanted to make sure that these were places that only people could go. And so that was my one rule for writing my books, where these are places that were open to the public or at least had access to the public and were like available. So I refuse to write about places. People are like, well, why didn't you put this place in your book? I'm like, well, because it's private property, and if you go on it, you're going to get shot. So I don't want to do that. And so that became our rule. And that's the rule we followed through with on Eerie Travels for the podcast, is we will not talk about a place that is not publicly accessible, not a place that you cannot travel to, or at least travel adjacent. Like we'll do episodes on pop culture and stuff like that. You may not be able to go to the filming location, but we can talk about something that's themed by it, stuff like that. So that's part of it. So that is, but that's what we did. For each of my Florida books, I spent over 10,000 miles, never left the state, each book, going to location with my wife, Carrie, who's my illustrator /
Oh, okay. So she's your wife. Okay. I saw that she's the illustrator on your website, on the eerietravels.com website. Yeah. And I was like, then I saw that she was a co-author on one of the books. I was like, who is she? Okay.
Yeah, all right. She's very much the teller to my pen. She's quiet, says very few things. But she is a genius when it comes. People will tell us what they saw, and she's like a forensic illustrator. She can bring out the details. We had Linda Sigmund, one of the last living Mothman survivors, witnesses who saw the original Mothman site. She was a child, and it actually picked her up at one point. Amazing person. And she described it as basically a flying Sasquatch. And no one had ever drawn it like that. Everybody always draws it with the feathers, or they draw it based on the statue or the Frazetta drawing. And so when she drew that, Linda Sigmund, man, she broke down in tears when she saw it, because she was like, "That's it, that's it," and it was amazing to us. So
and that illustration is on the website, right?
Yeah. You can. We have a shop, and you can purchase any of the illustrations from any of our books, because people love the illustrations as much as the books. And the other thing, though, if you're traveling, one of the things you can do, which Mark does really, really well, but is we'll go to a place and we'll go, so what are the stories? Like, is this place haunted? Is this place? And so what will happen is maybe we travel to go see X place, but we end up seeing Y, Z, because people will tell us stories, and then you go further and further and you keep following the story. And some of them are great stories, and some of them are, they're not corroborated stories.
Yeah. That's the other thing, is we always have to have at least two witnesses for me to write about it, or us to talk about it. I won't talk about the one time the one guy saw the one thing. Yeah. I'd love to, but if we did that, where's the realism? Where's the scientific corroboration or anything? But if two people saw it independently, then I'm like, yes, okay, we can talk about this.
Yeah, that's a great approach. Gives it more, credibility, definitely.
But bringing it back to cons, that's one certain things at cons and say, hey, I have a story about this from somebody somewhere, and then suddenly somebody across the room, and this has happened a couple times, where they said, oh my God, I thought I was the only person who saw that. And it's like, okay, now I can.
Now we're getting somewhere.
Yeah.
Right. And in sales, we call that information confirmation. It's basically two people saying pretty much the same thing. And like I said, if two people say it's got to be true, right? It's almost like being Facebook official or something.
Yeah, there's that. They used to joke, was the great magazine Weekly World News. Everybody remember that?
Yeah.
Weekly World News, they needed one source. If somebody said it was true, then it was true. And that's why they ran Elvis Ate My Baby.
Everything.
You know, stuff like that. You know, and Bat Boy, our wonderful West Virginia boy.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, true.
Leave pepperonis and 7-Up out for him, and he'll come visit. But that was, you know, and then, you know, modern journalism is supposed to be 3 sources. Of course, 24-hour journalism, they go back to the one source and it's fine. But we split the difference. We just want to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. So you told us a little bit about, both of you have told a little bit about your background, but was there one thing that stands out in your past that kind of sparked your interest in the paranormal?
Oh, so I have a lot of haunting stories. I guess the term a lot of people use is empathic. I see dead people, like that whole movie when he was like, I see dead people. I'm like, I don't need to see that. I've seen dead people my whole life. And I've had that since I was very, very young, including an invisible friend that I had for a very long time. So I experienced that a lot growing up. So I have different UFO stories too, because I lived out in California and New Mexico, and they have sort of a different UFO phenomenon than a lot of places. Not that other places don't, but the desert, there's a lot of night sky, and especially before Starlink, because nobody ever needs to report a Starlink launch to me and Mark again, ever in the world. Every time Starlink launches, we get 1 million pictures, UFOs, and Mark is like, it's very funny, his frustration level of people saying that. He's like,
I have a copy paste now for that.
Yeah. But that's my experience, and is having my own personal experiences from being a very, very young child. And then Mark even has cryptid stories, Mark.
Yeah. I grew up with a haunted house as well. At one point when we lived in Dayton, Ohio, one of my earliest memories is seeing basically a shadow figure type thing. And that's what always drew me to it. But the thing that won me over was, it was in this late 70s, early 80s. So I'm around 10 or 11 years old. It's post Star Wars, post Close Encounters of the Third Kind. So I'm on our farm in Louisa, Kentucky, out waiting to be abducted by aliens, watching the skies. And our land had a story. It had a holler monster. It was this just a creature that every member of my family had discussed. And when I tell it to you, you're going to laugh because it sounds like something out of South Park. It is
something out of South Park.
It's exactly something out of South Park. It has the head of a man, but it's kind of deformed and it glows. But the body of a big cat or maybe a small cow and a wooden leg. And it's called the bench leg.
Yeah. The bench leg. That's what your family named it?
That's the bench leg of Goble Ridge. Oh, and if you ask people in that area, people will know about it or have a story about it. And and they've seen it since the 1700s. Oh. And people have seen this thing for generations. And I'm out there in the woods late one night. I didn't really care about that monster. It was just such a goofy story. I wanted spooky things. I wanted Bigfoot. I wanted ghosts. Bigfoot had scared me to death on $6 Million Man when Andre the Giant jumped at the screen. Come on. So a cow with a human head, that ain't scaring me. But late one night, I'm out there and one of the horses runs past me in the middle of the night. and that's scary enough.
Yeah.
When you hear the hoof beats, and then and then the second one runs past. I'm like, all right, well, there's both the horses. Something stirred them up, and I've got my little Red Ryder BB gun. So I'm not going to do much damage unless I shoot its eyes out, whatever.
For a 12-year-old, that's like a 12 gauge. So I mean,
I should have. I had my rifle and my shotgun, but I didn't bring them with me because I'm looking for UFOs. Yeah. And then suddenly I hear something coming, and I'm like, oh God, is it? There's bears on this property, so maybe it's a bear. And I'm like, oh, my BB gun ain't going to do me much good. Poops. But and then I saw something glow, and about 3 feet or 4 feet off the ground, glowing as it ran by me, and it had a misshapen, weird head. I didn't see if it had a wooden leg, but it looked like a panther of some sort with a humanish head. So, Wampus cat, we'd have called it down here in this area or something like that, but. It ran past and disappeared in a blink of an eye, and I was like, suddenly I have a bench leg story. So and that's when I started re-listening to all my uncle, my grandparents, everybody's story, and I started collecting them, and that was what started it all. So
wow. So you really like stories. Both of you really like stories, and we're like that too. We totally enjoy people's stories and hearing new stories and just interacting with people. So that's really interesting because you, Erika, said that you came from like a more of a true crime background, but then you also had your personal experiences when you were a child, and you're seeing people who weren't seen by others. Did it frighten you?
It didn't, some of them, because, depending on the situation, my mother told me that I had to stop talking about it because people were going to lock me away if I kept talking about different situations and different things. She believed me because it was very specific. I have just a ton of stories, but she said that I had to stop talking about it, right? And that's one of the things I think, when you're a little kid and you're talking about things, because I think, I definitely was afraid at times and very much believed my blanket could save me from everything if I hid under it, that magical impenetrable barrier of the blanket, right? So there was that, but more so what was interesting is that I was very big into horror movies. In California, when Nightmare on Elm Street got released, they actually went on the news and said Freddy Krueger wasn't real, that you couldn't actually die in your sleep. So, and that, it's different. People don't realize the internet wasn't a thing. You got your news from news stations at 6 o'clock. And so, and that's when the Night Stalker was killing. There was a lot of stuff. So true crime and horror always fascinated me. But a lot of this stuff and growing up and seeing stuff, I didn't talk about it because people think you're crazy. You can't talk about a bench leg creature. Well, don't even get me started about the bench leg creature, but you can't, that was my whole thing. Like I shouldn't talk about it. So it wasn't until I was older and I found like-minded people that I could discuss it, right? And have the conversations, because I could be there in a room with somebody with something else there and be like, I can't say a single thing because I don't need to be put away. Which is what my mom had convinced me of. And then, where Mark was looking for UFOs, I saw them in the deserts of New Mexico and stuff like that, so it was very different. But growing up, that was my thing. And me and Mark have very similar love for horror, whether it's amazing horror or cheesy horror. Mark will take the cheesy horror way beyond where I will take. The amount of times this man has said to me, "This is such a good movie." Like, that phrase means nothing to me coming out of his mouth anymore, because he's I'm going to say, encourage me to watch certain movies. And I'm like, literally, I'll be like, can we pop, what the hell is this? Like,
but there have been a few where you were like, oh yes, I get it.
Yes, there are some movies I've thoroughly enjoyed, but we're at a 50-50 split now. So I like just have to brace for impact. If he's like, you know, this movie, we should watch it. It is about radioactive earthworms and the scarecrow they inhabit, which sounds like it might be a cool movie. It's not.
It is. There's definitely that line. I grew up as a monster kid. Because of that incident, I started grabbing anything horror I could. And back then, we had the horror hosts. Down here in Florida, we had Dr. Paul Bearer. Up there, we had Dr. Creep out of Cincinnati. And they would show these terrible movies all night. And, El Santo back there on the wall behind me was my hero. He was this Mexican luchador that fought monsters. Yeah, it was like we fought Dracula and the vampires. And half the time they didn't even translate the movies. They just play them in the Spanish. And they were so rudimentary, he didn't care. He just knew. And it's so funny because it's like Batman for fighting monsters. You just show the police will be like, oh God, this scientist has been killed by a vampire. And then Santo shows up. He's wearing the wrestling mask and his cape and tights. And people are like, oh, Santo, thank God you're here. And it's like, what? And they made 200 movies. I'm like, yes, this is my life.
Imagine your parents. I mean, you're running around and you're probably trying to repeat some of the words, and you're running around speaking something. You're like, blah, and they're like, I have no idea what he's saying.
What are you talking about? And this is the height of the satanic panic. So they're convinced I'm some demonic child that's talking about ghosts and demons and monsters, but then they'd be like, no, we don't talk about that. We don't talk about that. But then as soon as you get home after church, they'd be like, okay. So then there's this one monster lives over on this holler. Got the head of a caterpillar and the body of a cow, and you're just like, wait, now I got to hear this. But that's not demonic.
Talk about it now, but not then.
That's
right?
not demonic.
Like, you know, talk about
that's
this.
A monster. It's different. It's a real creature.
Yeah,
this monster's real, but that one's not.
Yeah, our parents thinking we were worshiping Satan with our Dungeons and Dragons habits. So we're firmly rooted in that situation.
That was a thing. Yeah, I remember hearing that it was bad and you're not supposed to play it.
Well, I do have a question for Erika. You said you started seeing, dead people when you was a small child. Now, you see a lot of movies, you do a lot of reading and stuff, you hear that most of the time that goes in a bad way. But when you first started seeing the person, did you ever try to figure out what it was, what their history was? Were they trying to send a signal? Were they trying to, go toward the light? Or, what kind of vibe or what kind of research did you do to kind of go into that?
There was no research. I was a small child. I ran into the situation a couple times. Like, my invisible friend was very real to me. He would rip, I'd tape pictures, we all color and tape them up on the wall. He'd pull them off the wall. He liked to knock the hangers out of my closet. His name was Charlie, but he was with me all the time. And I'll tell you one of the stories that was really interesting. So one of them was he was busy knocking hangers off of things in my closet. I'm in my bottom bunk, and my sister's in their top bunk. She's asleep, but I hear him knocking stuff. And my mom comes flying in the room, and I'm in my, typical my blanket assortment, which kept me protected, blanketness. And she looks at me, and then she hears he's still going in the closet, and she opens it, and she's like, yeah. And you hear clunk. And one falls, and then that was it. And I was like, cool. And so, she wouldn't really kind of talk about that as much, but that happened. But I was with, and then, as I got older, he was still there. He was around all the time. And I was driving with a friend of mine's parents. We lived in California. They moved 2 hours away. So they'd drive down and come pick me up to take me back for the weekend to her house, which was really cool. And at the time I didn't know how to appreciate that as much, but we're sitting in the car he was there. I knew he was there. And they pulled us to go get ice cream on the way back. And she literally, I never said anything to her about it because I was told people will think you're crazy. Don't talk about it anymore. And we're sitting there and they're like, hey, what do you want? And she says, I want blah. And Charlie wants a blah. And I was like, what? She plain as day. And so they're like, funny, you're not getting 2 ice creams. So they got us our ice creams. And I was like, do you see him? And she's like, yeah, he's sitting right there. And I was like, cool.
Oh, you see him too. Okay.
So we talked about it a little bit. And she's like, he's always there when you're there. I think a lot of times invisible friends are, I think, somebody who decided to stay, like, because they're very aware. And anytime I've talked to somebody who's had one, they can tell you, ask a kid, they'll tell you the story behind their friend. Yeah. You go ask them, they'll go talk to them about it. So I think sometimes, you know, especially growing up now, I think sometimes people are stuck. I also think we call them repeat ghost, or Mark calls them stone tape, which is based off of yet another weird horror movie that you can watch from the UK. Hashtag warning you, it's super weird and the woman's voice will drive you nuts. But it's about, you know, things that are kind of on repeat. A lot of people talk about it. You know, something goes running down the hall screaming and then it just keeps doing that night after night. I don't know that something's there so much as there's some like emotional or something like that, attachment to whatever that is. Like, and so, but I've seen them in hospitals where I think they had something traumatic happen and they got stuck and they're just not, somebody hasn't picked them up again. And, you know, so for the most part, when I was younger, I didn't see a lot of bad things. As I got older, there were bad things. Now, whether they're spirits or something else, yeah. So there are places like Waverly. We drove up there. Mark is like, let's go see the Poplick Bridge. We went and saw that. That's got a little heaviness to it. But then he's like, we'll go stop by Waverly, which is the insane asylum where
just casually stop by.
I know the owner. Let's just give him a call. He'll let us drive up and take a picture.
Cool.
Yeah, no, not. So we didn't even get to the front gate. And I was like, no, turn around. I can't do this right now. I could feel it. Like I started not being able to breathe.
I was literally getting on the phone to call him and just say, hey, we're at the gate. Can we just
and I was like,
to come in for a few minutes, take a picture? And she wouldn't even let me dial the phone. She's like, no, we got to go now. Out.
Yeah. And for me, I have to be a lot more prepared and mentally and with stuff to enter in something that's that heavy, because it's heavy. So I don't know if that answers your question, but what I found for me, and I know a lot of people have different things because some are auditory. I forget what that's called, but some like hear them and some feel them. I see it like almost like it's a picture. Like I'm seeing a picture of something, like a movie in my head. That's what I see. I see a picture of whatever it is. They're not, but I played games with one for several weeks and didn't realize he wasn't there until somebody told me that he wasn't there. So that was super cool. Yeah.
Wow. So going to Waverly, that brings us back around to, I wanted to ask, since you've been in this journey together for the podcast, what is, and each of you may have a different one, but what is the creepiest or heaviest or most unusual location you've been to?
Erika?
Mushroom Mines. Let's talk about that place. You knew I was going to say that, Mark.
I knew you were going to go there.
Mushroom Mines?
So Mark I'm going to let Mark tell the story of this place because there's a story. Let him tell, and then you better not give this away. I'm going to explain how he took me to the Mushroom Mines.
So the Mushroom Mines is near Carter Caves, Kentucky. And it was an old mine that was a limestone mine near Olive Hill. Kentucky, and they after a while, the limestone market dried up, so the mine was empty. 2 miles of tunnels down there, and in the 50s they decided, hey, this is perfect for growing mushrooms. We got all these fields out here with lots of cattle, so we can put manure in there, and we'll grow mushrooms, and it became one of the biggest things for mushrooms in the United States for decades. And then we started getting our mushrooms from overseas, became cheaper. So the mine dried up and died, and it basically became abandoned by the 70s, and sat abandoned. It's still pretty much abandoned. At one point, a computer company was going to buy it and turn it into a place to store old servers and stuff, because it's permanently 68 degrees. You don't have to have air conditioning and all that down there. It was a big scam. Some guy was laundering money, and so the town basically just died around it. But the mines are still there, and it became a place people would go spend the night out there. It's kind of you dare your friends to go spend the night in the mines in town, because it's 2 miles of tunnels. And I'm not going to spoil the next part of the story. Let's go to Erika when I took her there.
So he tells me this story, and that the person who owns it right now wants to turn it into some sort of entertainment venue, which is crazy.
Like caverns in Nashville area where they have concerts and stuff.
Yeah.
We're going to other places, and he's like, oh, we're really close to the mushroom mines. And I was like, the mushroom mines? So he tells me this part of the story. And I was like, okay, that seems weird. I'm wearing flip-flops. So that tells you how unprepared to go on this adventure I was. But we do have a lantern, and we start going into this place. It is dark. Like, it gets really dark really quickly. Like, if you live out in rural areas, you understand there's like no light pollution. There are no lights down this place. And there's graffiti. And honestly, we're just going to say this. It is actually, we were trespassing, to be honest, right?
It is private property. So you're not supposed to go in there at any times. Like I said, we only go places you're allowed to go. But somebody conveniently spray paints graffiti on the front door. Help.
Yeah.
So you're allowed to go in a place if you think there might be somebody who needs help. So
That is true.
Into the cave, like you can see the opening behind us, but it's getting smaller, and we have our lantern. And right when that happens, because like I'm feeling not completely comfortable, but I'm like, okay, I trust Mark. Famous last words. Okay, we're gonna go in. And then he mentions the dead bodies that have been found throughout these caves. So, Mark, why don't you explain that part of the story then?
Because it's 2 miles of mines that nobody goes into, people found it to be a convenient place to hide some things they'd rather not have found, including one kid who killed his parents, and he decided to hide them up there. And then there were some cultists and some other things that were not part of the Satanic Panic, but were afterwards, that would hold rituals up there and stuff like that. And there's been some scary encounters with some people. So we weren't going to go down there. We were only going to stay by the front entrance. Come on.
We were past the front entrance. And
she wouldn't have went if he would have told her that.
Exactly.
Where's all the fun?
Exactly.
I mean,
here's my rule.
Like
I have a concealed carry permit. I would go in if I had a weapon. I had no weapon. We had a little plastic like flashlight. And Mark, which I appreciate Mark, but he's doing nothing other than being tripped by me if something's chasing us. Like,
and also with flip-flops, like you're not going anywhere fast.
Yeah.
Exactly. So he dead bodies. I'm like, I'm sorry, what? And then he explains it, and I'm like, nope, I'm out. We're going. I'm out. Let's go. Now we're not going, because he's just walking along as if nothing's happening. And
now
I'm
you
like,
can email and get permission to go there to the owner. It's a company out of Sweden because they want to sell the place. so you can go there with permission, but they don't like paranormal teams or anything going in there. They just want people who might be interested in buying the property or developing the property and stuff like that. So.
Well, Erika, were you feeling and sensing anything as you're going into the cave before Mark told you about the dead body?
I was like, what? This is just I kept asking, this is just a mushroom mine? This is just this is all that happened? And then he's like, well, and I'm like,
well, actually,
I had some expletives that came out of my mouth because I was like, this is not funny. But I do have protection that I wear that's been given to me. And I take it with me everywhere. So I do have that degree of stuff. It just was more like I went, I don't know. I don't think anything was necessarily bad or whatever. It wasn't like Waverly where I was like, no, definitely not prepared for that. But I just felt like this is a little more dangerous than I'm okay with doing. And that's why we also encourage people don't go places alone. Make sure you're prepared if you're going places because you don't know what you'll encounter. And it was also, he left out the one part that because it's 68 degrees, there are a lot of transients and homeless people that live down there.
Sometimes it's the middle of nowhere, so it's not common, but people do tend to camp there sometimes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now,
drag their dead bodies and leave them there. So,
So my scariest place, though, doing all of this, I love the May Stringer house. I got to bring it up because it's in Brooksville, Florida. I always bring it up
every time you can.
Every time I can. It's the best haunted house with ghosts in it in the world. There's a year waiting list to go visit this place in Brooksville. For ghost tours. You can go during the day anytime. There's 6 or 7 ghosts known in that place. One in particular, Mr. Nasty, up in the attic, is he's named that way for a reason. And our friends Chris and Jay, I took them there. I took a bunch of YouTubers there. Every year they do a haunted house in the haunted house, an attraction in their haunted location.
Yeah.
But I took some YouTubers there to show off the place, Tampa Jay and Chris the Girl. And we got up into the attic and they had let us stay in there afterwards, after hours. And we caught on tape Mr. Nasty flinging open the door and chasing us out, basically. It's pretty epic. If you look up Tampa J or Chris the Girl Real Haunted House, that'll be the first thing that pops up on YouTube.
That'll come up. Okay, cool.
But the place that got me the most, the place that we've always had the most interaction with, is our favorite boy, Robert the Doll, down in Key West.
Who is a handsome, wonderful boy.
Yeah, he's the best boy in the world. I did the documentary on him for Travel Channel and got to hang out with him for a number of days. And the week after, both of my kids were in car accidents and almost died. And I had to write Robert a letter because that's the rule. You write Robert a letter, you don't know what you did wrong. And that's exactly what I said. I said, Robert, I thought I made sure that film crew followed every rule. I thought we did everything right, but whatever we did wrong, I'm sorry. And after that, we were fine. So, but if you go there, you will feel that just heaviness when you get around that doll. He is incredible. So,
wow.
Have you had a chance, like you went around Robert, and there's a couple other famous dolls like Annabelle and things like that, of all the haunted items or materials and things like that, have you had a chance to meet Annabelle or any other things like that? Because those are things on the bucket list, but I know things have changed since COVID and they've shut some things down.
Well, the Warrens Museum is closed to the public because they got zoned out of existence. But Annabelle is making the rounds. And I met Annabelle way back in the 80s because, like I said, I was a creepy kid. And once I started getting into the monsters, I wrote Hans Holzer about some of his cases. And he's like, well, if you really want to know something creepy, go meet these people, the Warrens. And my father drove me out to their house and dropped me off with this little 12-year-old me with this elderly couple that talk about demons. And he just,
Would you just like knock on the door and you were like, hey?
no, I wrote him ahead and said we were coming.
Okay.
And, but then my dad just dropped me off and drove off. He had nothing to do with it.
Suitcase. My dad said I could stay the night.
Yeah, no, and I hung out with him for a few hours, and there's this creepy doll in a case. I didn't care about that. I was super excited about the Enfield poltergeist from England, and I wanted the music box, and I knew they had the music box, so I wanted to talk to them about the music box. I didn't realize that they'd kind of made up that whole bit about the music box, that it had really nothing to do with the haunting, but I didn't know at the time.
Yeah. But you saw Annabelle, right?
Oh yeah, I met her, and I didn't. I was just, why is that Raggedy Ann doll in a box? It doesn't make sense to me. I didn't even think about it at the time.
Yeah.
But Robert, oh my God, Robert is terrifying.
Wow.
And nothing else at the Warrens really gave me the heebie-jeebies. Honestly, the music box I was fascinated by, but now that I know the truth behind it, I'm like, eh. And Annabelle didn't bother me at all. So, but yeah, Robert, don't poke the bear with Robert. Don't poke the bear with Robert. He's the real deal. There's a reason he gets 150 letters a week of people apologizing to him. So,
wow,
Annabelle doesn't get that.
No. Yeah. Now, I just think it's so cool that you got to meet the Warrens when you were 12 years old.
Yeah, who knew? Who knew? I didn't even think about it. They were just these couple that had written a couple books that I'd read. Hans Holzer was who I wanted to meet. I never got to meet him, but I got to send letters to him and back and forth, and a bunch of others and stuff like that. But that was back then. You didn't think about it when you were a kid. 12 years old, just sending letters off.
Yeah, right. Well, they got more and more popular, I guess, after the whole series.
After Amityville, Amityville made everything different, and that was. I don't think I would have gotten the invite after that, but before then they hadn't quite made their money yet. So
yeah.
So cool.
Kind of a strange story to kind of go with that. Last night when I come home, we're sitting there, and sometimes we just pick out a random movie, and it just so happened, just out of the blue, Lisa, my girlfriend, she picks The Conjuring. So I'm like, why pick this movie? Because it's just out of the ordinary for her. She goes, I don't know. I just seen it and kind of wanted to watch it. So I was like, okay, cool. It's a great movie. We haven't seen it in a while. And she fosters cats, and we've got a couple here. And near the end, when everything starts kicking off, this new kitten that we got, he comes up and it's like laying in her arms. All of a sudden, it just starts looking like it sees something. And, and it's never done before. And then the other cats start doing that. And I'm just like, y'all need to stop.
Whoa.
And it just kind of creeped me out because, like, for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, they just start looking like there's something there. And I'm the animals.
The infrasound they put in the soundtracks on some of these movies. People will always say, hey, after that movie, I was more susceptible to things like that. They put that in the soundtracks, the infrasound, and it's something we can't hear, but animals do. But it triggers that fear response in us. And that Paranormal Activity, I think, was the first movie to really start pumping that out. And that's why that when something's going to happen, you can just feel it, because that sound is underneath everything. I think Blair Witch Project did a little bit too, but not to the extent the later ones did. Yeah. And
he was just like looking over in the corner like something was there, and then he'd look up like something was just like floating above her head, or he'd look over it like a certain, and he had just look like something's there, and I'd be looking. I'm like, no, we're not doing that right now. It's like,
turn this off.
I can tell you that I have a cat story, because my daughter had a guardian angel, something that we thought her name was Kathy, and we only found out her name because my son was like, well, what is her name? Had a dream that night of a person coming and sitting on his bed and saying, my name's Kathy. In the morning, he's like, her name's Kathy. So he called her Kathy, but she used to play with the cat. She would, how like if you kind of chase a cat and then it'll chase you and do that, it would do that for hours.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, people would be like, what is your cat playing with? And I'm like, I don't know.
Honestly,
I'm like, I don't know. Weird.
That's the kind of ghost I want to be.
Toy. Like, cool.
Yeah. I feel like that's the kind of ghost I want to be. Like, I don't want to haunt people. I just want to play with your animals. Like, I just want to play with your pets.
No, I'm messing
with Callie. That's going to be Callie.
I'm messing with people. I'm scaring you. All you that scared me growing up, I'm coming for you. Just letting you know.
Eric has this theory, like cosplay ghosts.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Because there's so many ghosts. You see Elvis so many places. Up north, it's George Washington slept here, and down in Florida, it's Al Capone or Babe Ruth. You know, they were there for like 2 weeks. There's no reason they're haunting every hotel in Florida. Yeah, but so that's what she's convinced that the ghosts cosplay as these famous people and hang out in places.
I'm just firmly convinced that a spirit, whatever soul, whatever belief system you have, right, does not have an identity. It's, you know, whether it's a kid or an adult or whatever, like it is just that, right? It's this not corporeal thing. So when somebody goes, oh, like the lady in white, that's my favorite one to bring up, because if you ask people about a lady in white, every single time they will tell you a story. It's Sally who lost her kids, or Mary whose husband died, or whatever, right? But the fact is, the lady in white is something else, because throughout history have been lady in whites. Like all Asia has them. Everywhere. Like back before there was internet, newspapers, anything, there are stories of a woman, usually with dark hair, wearing white. She's usually wet for whatever reason or near water. And every time it's about loss. And I'm firmly convinced it's some sort of grief entity. Like it represents grief, because normally it's a sad story. But, you know, people go, it's a little kid ghost. Well, spirits aren't little kids. That, you know, a soul or a spirit is just a soul or a spirit. It just is manifesting as a little kid, or manifesting as a dog, or manifesting as an old man. But like Mark said, the amount of people who see Elvis as a ghost places, I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. I don't think so. Or she walked in, it was a Victorian lady, and obviously it's Veronica, the Victorian lady. And I'm like, dude, that could be Clive the gardener, who's like Victoria lady, you know? And the different people will see different versions of something. So I'm really convinced ghost cosplay and like to mess with people.
That's a great theory. I love it. I've never heard that, but that makes total sense. Yeah. Total sense. Yeah. Now, I want to, Erika, while we're talking to you, I want to ask, I saw that you co-host another podcast called Drinking with Authors.
Yes, it's been on a little bit of a hiatus this year, but it's coming back at the beginning of next year. And it's 400 episodes, and really it's an excuse for me to get drunk with other authors and talk about ridiculous things. So that's another podcast that Mark's co-hosted with me on that before I got him to do Eerie Travels. And I, being an author for the last 20 years, you don't get to see like the other side, like sort of behind the curtain with most authors, because they're usually very kind of quiet and reserved. Not all of them, but a lot of them, it's hard to get them to talk. But, you know, you do a Irish car bomb with one and you're going to get them to talk. And then you have weird conversations. I think Jonathan Mayberry is not allowed to do Drinking with Authors anymore with me. I think his wife's forbidden it due to the volume of whiskey that we consume while we're doing that podcast. So I got to get, especially during COVID when we all ended up, like I used to do it as a live thing in Florida where we'd go to a bar and an author would come and we'd have drinks and talk about their book. That I did that with Mark for Eerie, Florida.
That was when we started.
Yeah. But COVID happened and we all kind of got stuck in our houses, and I went, let's chat. Let's do this. We can do this, you know, online. And so it's a lot of fun. So I'm restarting it again in January, but it's going to be done as a YouTube live where I'm just going to get people on and make them drink with me live, and then probably get banned, you know.
Is it do you have a lot of paranormal authors on, or is it just the general?
It's in general. You name it. I know a lot of horror authors, so a lot of horror authors have been on, and paranormal authors and stuff. It's interesting because I find a lot of people that write paranormal are more investigators, like Mark. You know, like Mark has a background, and he's written fiction and stuff before. Don't get me started about trying to get him to write more fiction. That's a whole other story. But a lot of the paranormal authors are people who have had true life experiences. And so it's a little bit different. And now that we have this podcast, we get to talk to them more. We get to interview people that have tried to write their story, because I think mainstream is still not 100% on board with the paranormal. Like Mark is a little bit of an enigma in a way with History Press or Arcadia Publishing, whatever you want to call them, because he had this idea and they went, oh, okay, I get, yeah, let's try it. And then he's a best-selling author. So all of a sudden they went, oh, people want to hear about ghosts, you know, like he sort of broke that fourth wall for it, but still they want to hear ghost stories in places, but they don't want you to necessarily talk about your Bigfoot encounter, your vegetable man encounter, your UFOs. Like mainstream is still not 100% on board for the true life stories like that. I think. Mark, thoughts?
No, I agreed. It's one of those, we noticed that with the book. Like I said, before I did, the History Press was known for, you know, the history of the Battle of Ulusty, you know, the history of your small town. You'll see them all over the place in the little gift shops and stuff like that. When you go to a tourist attraction, History Press, and 90% of their books sold 600 copies in their lifetime. And then I reached out to them and said, hey, I have this idea for a ghost story book of Tampa Bay. And they're like, oh, we already have a Tampa Bay book. Could you do all of Florida? And I'm like, sure, you know, but I want to put monsters, because I wanted to put Skunk Ape in. I was updating Eerie, updating Weird Florida, and I wanted to make it a bit more like that. And they said, okay, we'll try that. And once it hit, I got on Coast to Coast AM. I got on a lot of the, you know, the paranormal shows. And suddenly they were like, oh man, we sold out first print in an hour before it even gone to press. So they were like, okay, we're doing a second print. We're doing a third print. We're doing a fourth print. And they finally just stopped telling me how many prints we were on, because it was just, they were just keeping me in constant publication. And they used me to get into all the CVS's, Walgreens, and finally Cracker Barrels in Florida. And they even came up to me as after the first one hit, they were like, hey, you said you had all these other stories. Could you do a second book? Could you do a third book? And I'm like, well, give me time, but I'll get them. So we slammed out those 3 Florida books in 3 years. And a lot of traveling, a lot of places. But then at that time, I was doing a lot of the TV shows and podcasts and radio shows and stuff like that. And that's what built up this audience. And that was finally, we took 2 years to do Appalachia, because now we've taken 2 years to do the new one. So, but that's where it blew up. Honestly, I'd done fiction for years, and it'd all been minor things. And we did a haunted house book, but that was a self-pub thing, but that's what it's all about. That's how it takes. It just takes that right click at the right time. And then next thing you know, you're doing this nonstop. So,
wow.
But
and it seems like you really, I was going to say, seems like you really love it.
Yeah. I am not a Bigfoot hunter. I am not a ghost hunter. I am not a UFO hunter, but I go with Bigfoot hunting teams, UFO hunting teams, ghost hunting teams to get their stories. That's where that's what started all this. I one guy called me a paranormal journalist, and I loved that. I thought that was,
that's great.
I'll take that. I'll take that title. So
that's great. Cool. Yeah, I could tell you have a passion for it. And I guess to write in that genre and go out with these teams, you have to like people too, right?
Oh yeah. We went out with David Sidoti of the Independent Sasquatch Research Team in Florida, and we're in the middle of the swamp in Florida, the Green Swamp, and he's talking about how many people go disappearing here every week. I felt like Erika there, you know. It's like, wait a minute, I'm in Hawaiian. Everybody else is all dressed for the nines. I'm in Hawaiian print, and I got a 2-liter of Dr. Pepper with me, survival gear and all that. I'm like, I suddenly realized why I am not a Bigfoot hunter.
Well, that surprises me because I thought Bigfoot, like Sasquatch, was like more like in the mountainous areas.
Oh, I mean, they're more common Pacific Northwest. We've got tons right here in the Smokies, seen quite often. And they're different varieties. And then Florida has the skunk ape, which is, the Everglades one. Dave Shealy runs the skunk ape headquarters. He's a good friend, great guy. He saw one in the 2000s that's lanky, more orangutan looking, and probably some of the best footage I've ever seen, all the way back to the Patterson Gimlin tape.
Wow.
In the 60s. And then the ones in Myakka are like big and silverback looking. There's a picture of one of them from the mid 2000s that's just crazy. And some lady took it off her back porch, anonymous. And then Ocala has more classic Bigfoot, and then the Panhandle's got completely different. They're more smelly swamp ape type things. They're the proper skunk apes. And it's just it's amazing to me how and we've got different people. I've seen it with Stacy Brown from Finding Bigfoot, his dad's footage, probably some of the most incredible footage ever, and all this. And then people still don't associate Florida with Bigfoot, which is crazy.
Yeah, I didn't. I would have not. That wouldn't be the first place that came to mind, or probably the 10th or 11th or 12th.
Yep. I think it has as much sightings as the Pacific Northwest.
Wow.
I think it was one of our first episodes where we kind of talked about a few cryptids, and we touched on Bigfoot. We didn't go into it, but those skunk ape pictures, like the two that he's kind of like behind the bush.
The palmetto bush. Yeah. That's the Myakka one.
I will never forget that as long as
it's incredible. There's two shots. She took them back to back, and then she sent them to the newspaper, said, I don't know what this is. I thought it was, a bear. Yeah. And we do have Florida black bears, but that's not a black bear.
It's like the limbs are so long, and like you can kind of see the face, but you can't see the face, and it looks like an orangutan, but it doesn't. Those are the wildest pictures. I swear.
Yeah, my our friends David Sidoti, Stacy Brown, they've all seen them. They've all got their experiences. RPG, Ryan Golimsky, they've all, their lives have changed because of this. That's all they do now, is they can't think of anything else but trying to get it on camera and capture that fleeting moment they had at one point, trying to catch it again. And that's just changed their lives. And it amazes me when I talk to people who've seen that stuff. It's the hairs on their arms stand on end. They just, they're going into it. And I've never seen that, but I'd love to.
Yeah. I always thought it would be cool to see a Sasquatch. And it's not a far cry to think that in this world, with all of the yet to be discovered species of animals, plants, I wouldn't be surprised tomorrow if someone said, "Oh, we found out he's real."
Yeah.
Well, I say this all that we use the term preternatural. Shirley Jackson, who wrote The Haunting of Hill House, said in her book preternatural, right? It's something we just don't know what it is.
Yeah.
I can say when I was a kid, the giant squid, that was a myth. There was no such thing as a giant squid. Sailors talked about it at down boats, but there was no such thing. And then they found one like less than 5 years ago. And then they found something even bigger, like a mega whatever squid in the depths. And so those things weren't real. There's so many creatures that people went, oh, that's not a real thing, right? At all. And then they're like, oh, just kidding. Here's this thing. This is the real thing. People have seen it. And I think, whatever those are, whatever the Mothman is, whatever dogmen are, whatever, and I'm not saying they're necessarily, which I'm not going to piss everybody off, but I don't know that they're liver breathing. I don't know if they're like a nature spirit, like what all of these things are, but they're very real experiences people have had. And we just haven't gotten all the science behind exactly what these things are now. And I think it's wonderful that like podcasts like yourself and podcasts like the ones we do, where we can actually have these conversations and bring it to the forefront so that the people who are really looking at this from a scientific standpoint and almost like an explorer standpoint, because when we say Bigfoot hunting, we're not talking about legitimately trying to go out and shoot the things. Me and Mark are very opposed to any of that methodology, but understanding what these things are around us and how they interact with us and, you know, what they do. And people need to not think that they're crazy or that, you know, and that's what we get with a lot of our listeners write in and tell us stories of things. And I'm like, some of them, you know, I have a joke. They'll always say, you know, when it comes to things, they'll be like, what should I do about this? No, Erika, I can't burn my house to the ground. And I'm like, well, that was my option A. Just burn it to the ground.
Just burn it.
But option B, but I think it's important. I think the podcast you guys are doing, it's important. It's important that we keep talking about it to get whatever these things are understood. And then maybe in 10 years, we're having the same conversation where if we went back to the 80s when we were growing up and we said, I've seen a giant squid, people would be like, you're crazy. Now they're everywhere.
My big thing is report, because everybody, I always say, everybody's got that crazy Uncle Joe who saw Bigfoot on the side of the road in Ohio in the 70s, and he's crazy Uncle Joe. But if you put his information, he saw it on I-70, 1976, July, and you put that in the BFRO database or one of these other databases like Expedition Bigfoot or something, suddenly you see there were 17 other sightings that same month and that same road, that same thing. Crazy Uncle Joe isn't crazy anymore. There was something there, and that's me with my family in the in the bench leg. Suddenly, when I saw it, it wasn't crazy anymore, and now I started documenting it and trying to track it and see how many people saw it. And sure enough, we talk about it on the podcast. We talk about it on other things, and then we got one of our first fan emails was a guy who said, "Hey, I read your story about the bench leg on your podcast. I heard about it," and he's like, "My family knows that story because our grandfather is the reason for that story." And we're like, what? And we learned this whole backstory that there was this peddler in the 1700s who lived in the area, and he had an ox that he dragged his cart around, and he got murdered by a bunch of bandits. And to hide the crime, they buried him with the cow body on top, so to pretend like to hide the crime. So that's why the mix in this creature. And this guy wrote it, and he said, yeah, because my grandfather was hung. He was one of the bandits who killed the guy, and he got hung for the crime. And he's an infamous member of my family I'm descended from. And I'm like,
wow. And one person got away. And that's why we think whatever this is still around, because one of the people got away. That
didn't get justice from that one.
Yeah. So it's a spirit, a vengeance creature of some sort. So it's cool. And I'm like, suddenly I had this whole backstory that I didn't even know.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
And it's crazy when you talk about cryptids and things like that, because the most popular thing that you hear when you talk about Bigfoot or things like this, well, if it was real, somebody would have saw them. And you're like, have you not seen the internet? Have you not seen people see them? They're like, oh, they're crazy. And you're like, there's people saying they're seeing them, but you're like, oh, nobody's seen them.
Well, and that was one of the things.
It makes no sense. You're like, really?
That's one of the things what we learned real quick is like park rangers. Everybody said, well, park rangers should be seeing them all the time. Park rangers will not go on record to say they saw it or not saw it because they refuse to go on record. And they will tell us, if you go on record about it, it's just like being a flight attendant and you say you saw a ghost and goes to flight 401, you're grounded. You're never flying again. If you're a park ranger, you say you saw Bigfoot, guess what? They're transferring you to Alaska or somewhere else or firing you. And it's that same hush is still going on to this day. And that's UAPs. We have government things talking about UFOs. We have all this other stuff. And there's a reporting agency you can report to now 100%. And we'll still get emails from guys saying, hey, I can't report this to my superiors because I'll get fired. But I wanted to tell you this ghost sighting. Please post this anonymously on your podcast and see if anybody will respond to that.
the other thing, and I say this all the time on our podcast because it's so true. A person is smart, but people are stupid. And if you look at, like, just take the Loveland Frogman, right? So that was first reported by a police officer who encountered, I think, 3 of them, right? Like
the original report was a traveling salesman saw it.
But
then in the 70s, 20 years later, a policeman sees one out of the blue and has no idea about the previous history of it. And he makes a report and it blows up.
And that's the thing, is that all of a sudden, all these people show up to quote unquote hunt this creature, right? And so you do have to, in today's day and age, take that a little bit into consideration, because like we've talked about the government thing with the UFOs, like if you watch those Senate committee hearings about it, there's a lot of stuff they do say if you listen, and there's a lot of stuff that they're about to answer a question, and then a call comes in going, that's confidential, don't talk about it, right? So they go, I can't answer that question. Saying I can't answer that question is answering so much of that question, right?
Yeah.
Because otherwise the answer is, no, that's not a real thing. You know, no, that never happened. Instead, it's, sorry, I can't answer that. But we're not of a time that somebody could come on the news and go, just, you know, by the way, UFOs are real. They've been here. Aliens are among us. Like, could you imagine that conversation happening? People would go completely nuts. So it's a very interesting balancing act. But Mark's point, report it. There's BFRO, there's MUFON. If you don't feel comfortable with the reporting agencies, there's, you know, Expedition Bigfoot. Report it to podcasts like Sirens of the Supernatural, record Eerie Travels, Cryptids of the Corn, Into the Fray. There's so many of us out there as a network that are willing to take your story that you don't feel comfortable relaying and will relay it just to have it on record, so that when people go, oh, Bigfoot isn't real, but here are the literally tens of thousands of people that have encountered a Sasquatch of some kind or an old man of the woods, right? Something's there, because it's not like, again, like the Veggie Man, where one person who was doing mushrooms saw the Veggie Man, right? Mark, isn't that?
That's my one cryptid that I always joke about. If I can get a second witness, I'll finally write about it. That's the one I always go, why did you put him in your Appalachian book? I'm like, because one guy saw him and he admitted he was high on mushrooms. I can't go more than that. So
now let me ask you, is Mothman in there?
Oh, yes.
In your book?
Yeah,
and I saw that you all are going to the Mothman Festival in September. Are you going to be speaking? Will you have a booth or anything like that?
We're not speaking this year. We spoke a couple years ago. They rotate the speakers every few years. We'd probably be speaking again next year. But we're behind the right butt cheek of the statue. That's where they put the celebrities. And then we have a tent there. And we will have Erika and I there. Bo, our producer, will be there for her first time ever at Mothman. And then Paige Lavoie, who wrote the I'm in Love with Mothman trilogy, we're going to have her there for the first time. She's going to be staying with us at our trailer in the mountains of Kentucky, West Virginia, and then coming with us to Mothman Festival for the weekend. So
that's amazing.
Well, somebody here seems to think Mothman is kind of thick in the back end. So
He is.
That's true, man.
He is. And Ryan
But Mothman,
so much shit for saying that, but he's got an ass.
Mothman is not a piece of cake. Mothman is here to warn us about critical infrastructure failure. Just remember that.
He just caked up back there.
But he does have an epic backside.
He does. When we went to get the picture, Mark's like, okay, let's get in. He goes and stands in front, and I just walk around behind the statue, and I was like, touch the butt.
That's not the picture I want. I want a picture from the back of it.
That's what I got. I was like,
if you watch the Moth Cam on YouTube, they have a camera from the Mothman Museum always on the statue 24/7. So you can watch every person drive up to it at any time. You'll see them take they'll get in front of it. They'll take their picture, and then they always go around the back and touch the butt and take a picture.
Well, that's on our bucket list to make it to the Mothman Festival, and we thought we might go this year, but probably it's going to be next year. We are going, however, to Scarefest in Lexington in October, and so we're really excited about that.
Yeah, we are.
And we'll all be there at the same time. Ryan's been to some horror cons, and Lindsay and I have been to some other things, but we've never gotten to do it at the same time together. So
yeah,
we're gotta come by and say hi. So.
Yeah,
are y'all going to be there?
That one we're doing a panel. Yeah, no, we have a booth and we're doing a panel.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. We'll have to make it to your panel. Yeah, that's going to be so much fun. Yeah, and meeting you guys in person too. Well, on that note, I want to ask, what other irons do you have in the fire, like together and separately?
So, I'm in the middle of writing a horror story about it's a younger adult horror story. So that should hopefully be up for pre-order at the end of the year. We have our Dark Side of the Smoky Mountain. Our next one in that series is, I think it's the Dark Heart of the Appalachians. And we also have the Dark Depths of Tampa Bay, or the Gulf Coast, Dark Depths of the Gulf Coast. Yeah. So those both should be up for pre-order probably at the beginning of the year and about mid next year. So we're working on that. And Mark is going to finish his fiction story, right, Mark?
Yeah, I've got one more book for History Press due, Eerie Southeast. It's basically all the coastal stories when I did Eerie Appalachia, the stuff that didn't fit in the mountains, but along the coast. And I'll be from North Carolina through Florida and then along to New Orleans. And then that one should be sometime next year. And then my fiction finally getting off the ground, about wildlife officers who deal with cryptids. So I can't imagine where I got the idea for that. So
yeah, and that'll be good. We have our research trips too, because we're going to be doing. So we did all the research for the ones that we just told you about, but we're going to be doing the coastline, the East
Midwest and Northeast. Yeah,
and then Texas.
Much more than that. So we got to narrow it down.
Yeah, and stuff. So we're looking forward to quite a bit of travel. And honestly, we're at conventions every single weekend, because before Mothman is the Flatwoods convention. So there's the anniversary of Flatwoods that's happening, which is an alien, but I'm not even going to go down that path. And then, back to back all the way through the end of November. And we actually are doing a Bigfoot hunt. We are doing
North Carolina Bigfoot Adventures, ncbigfootadventures.com. They're actually hosting us November 9th. We're going to be telling stories by the campfire and telling legends and stuff. And a couple Bigfoot hunters are going to be there with us. They're still finalizing who's going to be with us, but they'll be taking people on how to learn how to do cast prints, how to go hunting in the woods and stuff. And they've only got like 20 slots. I think a few of them have already sold. So, and it's camping in the North Carolina mountains in November. So it's early, crispy, early November. So it's right at the end of fall. You get all the colors. It should be epic.
I can know right now. That's gonna be my vacation.
November 9th. November 9th and 10th.
And what's the website?
ncbigfootadventures.com.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
We'll definitely be looking into that one.
There you go.
Ryan, you should take Steve.
right in the Smokies. Can't go wrong with that. Come on.
Right.
I can see right now. They'll be like, no, we know you was calling out because we watched your episode back in August.
Then they're done that. Yep.
Well, Lindsay, do you or Ron have any other questions you'd like to ask Mark and Erika?
I do have a couple questions. My first question would be, what is each of your favorite episodes of the podcast you've recorded from Eerie Travels?
Ooh, yeah.
Oh, I have to say my favorite episode, and only because I'm going to bring this up again here, which are the lovely Twilight vampires, which I got a picture of a sign that says Twilight vampires are the strongest, changed my mind. So I do have to give a little shout out to Stacy Brown, who I bring up every time because this really pisses him off. So we did an episode where we talked about the strongest vampires, like which ones, and I pissed off our entire audience because the truth is the Twilight vampires are actually the strongest vampires. Now, they don't have to be the favorite, but they're the strongest. And Mark hated, he kept trying to throw stuff up, but my favorite is this because fans will still come up to us and try to prove me wrong. Like almost every event, a fan comes up and is like, listen, it is not Twilight, it's this obscure vampire. And I'm like, oh, really? Explain to me the powers. And then literally it takes like 1 or 2 seconds. And I'm like, nope, because of this. So, you know, this is my hill to die on. So it's just funny to me because our fans are so engaged with us that it always makes me laugh when they show up. One showed up at one of the conventions I wasn't at. Mark was there with the videotape and is like, give this to Erika. It's
like, show her this movie so that she'll know that this vampire could eat Cullen. And
that's
so funny.
That was one of my favorite episodes just because I've said it on your show. I'm going to get an email or something saying
we're going to get more. We're going to get more email.
I never thought about that. They do have a lot of power. I never thought I never thought Glitter Boy would be like one of the most strongest vampires.
It is. I mean, they can go out in the sunlight, regardless that they sparkle like whatever, but they can go out in the sunlight. The only thing that can kill them is them or the werewolves. Like they have to be ripped apart and burned. They can't be staked through the heart. They can cross river. Like you just go through all the vampires and pretty much that whole daytime thing eliminates like 80% of vampires from even the equation.
Yeah.
Right. And Blade's made of sticky flesh. He might be tough, but you can take him down. So anyway, we could do this for a long time. I will win the battle. There we go. Mark, what about you?
You heard it here, guys. So if y'all have any objections, you know what I'm saying.
You know where to find her. EerieTravels.com. Find out her appearances and then show up. So, but I love the listener tales episodes. We get so many listeners. That was right off the bat. We started getting them where people were just like, "Hey, we'd love you to share this story. I don't want to come on, but I'd like you to share the story." And so we did an episode. I think it was a bunch of questions and a couple tales, and that blew up. And it became I literally constantly get at least 6 a day of emails, mostly questions, but then sometimes tales. And the tales are amazing. The stuff these people are telling us. Again, they want to report it. They've learned we need to report it. And a lot of them are anonymous, and we don't read full names or anything like that, but we try to read where they're at, what happened, and then suddenly we'll get a response like 6 or 7 weeks later. Somebody will send me an email back saying, "Hey, I'm so glad you talked about this because this is something." But I think my favorite though was we talked about a monster. Some guy sent us an email, said this thing was it's called the Boone Devil.
The Boone Devil
near Boonesboro, and it was summoned.
It's on his property, and it
was summoned to kill Daniel Boone.
Native American tribe summoned it to get rid of Daniel Boone and get rid of this fort. I'm firmly convinced people keep summoning things and then leave them there, but it's on his property, and he didn't believe it. Very much like Mark's ridiculous bench leg story, right? Yeah. Is him and his sister in the COVID, they ended up going home, which a lot of people did because they didn't know what else to do. So they went home and they were out walking near, there's a cave and there's a river sort of lake area right next to the cave. And their grandmother would tell them that this thing lived out there. And they were like, whatever, they're like 20, one was 24, one was 22. And they're like, whatever, crazy grandma, fine. They were walking out one day, daytime. And he said he was walking and he looked up and on a tree, yellow eyes staring right back at him. And he couldn't move. And his sister was like, what? And he's like, he couldn't stop staring at it. And then she saw it. And it started to move down towards them. And it's this big creature. And it was, so they ended up taking off running. went back to the house, and the grandmother's like, yeah, I told you the boom devil lives on the property. What the heck is your problem? And it's this big creature with kind of almost like an owl-like head, very huge, and would eat the catfish that are in this pond. Like, that was the whole thing. And we aired the podcast, and we talked about it.
And then
yeah,
the next like 2 days after it aired, I get this long diatribe from some professor at a nearby college telling me exactly how wrong that could possibly be and how it can't possibly be true, and that we were idiots for airing this and all this just huge we're promoting misinformation and all this. I'm like, we're just reading listener tales. I'm not saying that this is gospel or anything. This isn't a researched episode. But then not 5 minutes later, I get another email from somebody's like, oh my God, I live in that area and I've heard this story my whole life and I saw it when I was a kid. And and it's like, there we go.
Yeah.
So now that's become a creature we're researching for a future project. So
that's interesting. Never heard about that.
And then,
it's this solitary creature that was summoned to do this one thing, and it's just now.
Just never, I guess, went back to where it came from.
Yeah. Well, you got to put it back.
That's You're going to summon it.
You got to put it back.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, so we've gotten like 6 stories from people who've seen this Boon Devil thing. We did dutifully, because the professor wanted to make a point. We read his entire email, including his name, telling us that we were idiots. So you are welcome, Professor, because all of the other people that have seen it now, like, that's just one thing we can't abide by. Like, he was telling us how he's lived there forever and he's done research. And I'm like, okay, well, you're an we don't think we're experts on anything. Yeah. We're not experts. We've had experience with things, but we're like just winging it as well as everyone else.
Right.
Like, congratulations on your life, but also you don't have to listen if you don't want to.
Yeah, turn it off. It's fine.
It's so easy. Okay, so I guess that brings me to my next question, which is, what are your favorite cryptids?
Oh.
I love
it. Wow. I can tell you my least favorite cryptid.
That works too.
That's the knot deer. No, thank you. No, thank you very much. Hard pass on that one. I will. Nope.
They're freaky.
Yeah, and that's one that we actually think is a tulpa, like, because it was a creepypasta. There is native legends about deer creatures and deer women and all this other stuff, but the specific knot deer, very much like Slender Man, was a creepypasta. Now, there's a story in the Tampa Bay area about this creature, and Mark's going to tell it way better, so I'm not going to tell it, that is very much like Slender Man, but add a spider factor to that, which just makes him even creepier. But the knot deer...
I'm out on that.
Yeah, the knot deer blew up on creepypasta, but people have seen them, so there is something to... You put enough intention behind something that you can kind of bring it to life.
Manifest it almost,
Yeah. And so that I'm going to hard pass on the knot deer. I'm good.
Okay.
No.
I got to stick with my homeboy, the bench leg. It's so stupid, but it has to be real, and I've seen it. I've seen something. So I'm not saying it was the bench leg, but it was something that fit the bench leg description and all that. Yeah. So, but I do have a soft spot for the Loveland Frogman, just because it's such a crazy story. I love the ones that don't make sense.
Right?
Yeah. When the guy jumps out of the car to follow this frog, and then it's suddenly talking to 2 more, and then one of them pulls a wand and shakes it at him, and lightning shoots out of the end, and that's when he decides to run. I'm like, okay. That's a story. That's great. So that sort of thing, that's the stuff I love when it's got a story to it, right? That's that you got to love those.
Do you have a weirdest story that you've heard that just
weirdest is subjective?
Oh, that's true. I
got to go with Mini Lightning. the voodoo queen of St. Petersburg. She's she has 2 gator boys that will steal your children at night. She hates Marie Laveau, so she steers the hurricanes from Tampa Bay to Tampa. So that's why they always go from Tampa Bay to New Orleans. So that's why they always turn that way. So she protects Tampa Bay and all this. And it's just this crazy legend. And when you do research into it, you find out the real truth is so much worse.
We're not even going to talk about the real truth. It's in Erie, Florida, but
it's a true crime thing. And
it's horrific. It is.
And you can listen to our episode of Eerie Travels where we talk about mini lights.
Yeah.
Definitely will. Definitely will.
You don't need to get anywhere near that.
We won't go near that. Even your warning at the beginning of this episode might not cover.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
We'll
so
definitely
that
listen to that.
Continued, and we might be bringing you guys on a future date to
sounds like an invite back. Good. Yeah. When
Yes,
you're ready.
we'll definitely look for you at Scarefest.
Yeah.
And yeah, that'll be so cool. We're so excited. Thank you for coming on the show. We have had a long and interesting discussion, and I have loved every minute of it.
Yeah,
and
really
you guys
fun.
are great, and we know you got to get on the road in the morning, so we will let you go and get ready for Dragon Con, and I'm sure we'll hear great things have happened there, and hopefully all your panels will be filled, standing room only, and we hope to meet you, like I said, in September at Scarefest. Thank you again for coming on. We'll promote you. I know you guys are Eerie Travels on socials, YouTube.
EerieTravels.com has links to everything. So
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you guys can feel free to add this episode on to whatever you guys want to do too.
We
That'll
will.
help you guys also.
and now you guys have to come on our show now.
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
That is how we do this. Rising tide raises all boats. You guys got to come on us now. So
that'll work.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, that was a secret handshake you didn't know about. So
Yeah.
Okay.
it's our deal with the devil.
Here it is tribute. No.
Yeah, we would be delighted. Just reach out to us, and I feel like you've joined our paranormal family now, and it's a great community. It really is.
Yeah,
and,
you'll find we have not found one yet that's been kind of snotty or anything. It's so funny. We go through, like I said, back when I started this, the UFO people only want to talk UFOs. The ghost people only want to talk ghosts. Bigfoot people only want to talk Bigfoot. And we still get that a little bit, but we're starting to see the cross pollination, and people are finally starting to go, there's more to all these things, and we're all friends. And so I think that's going away. I think that generation is dying out. Thank God, thanks to podcasts like us and you guys. And that'll be, hopefully that's what it all becomes. So
yeah, definitely. It is a camaraderie there that's unique. But anyway, Godspeed, and hope you have safe travels to Dragon Con, and we will let you guys go. And Lindsay, I guess you can take us out with our weekly goodbye.
Weekly goodbye. Okay, and we're going to link all of their socials in our show notes, so definitely check them out if you haven't already. And we'll link our stuff down below too. But I guess at Dragon Con and wherever you are, listeners, just remember, stay spooky.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.